So, as Bharat had shared, this entire thing was done over 2 weeks, and we had a series of sessions which amounted to up to around 11 of those sessions, which included the opening sessions and subsequent ones based on the various topics that Meena just shared with us. So we recognize some of these are something which is an important point for us to discuss and receive uh, uh, recommendation from through a consultative process. So these sessions were then curated to have people who were experts in those specific topics to come and share their experiences, their understanding, and then have a kind of question answer, which kind of then created a conversation around those topics. And through that, some of the things that came about. So the first session, which was the opening ceremony, kind of gave an overview of what the situation was, and you would see that some of these topics will be then repeated over and over again in the subsequent sessions where we focused on two things. So the first thing which we all spoke about was we will not have any economy without a healthy ecology, and that was kind of you know uh, focused on a lot as to what do you mean by development and for whose development are we creating large scale destructions of the ecology, and therefore if it continues the way it is and if biodiversity conservation does not happen, uh, the economy will not sustain for too long. And to also notice that biodiversity conservation and livelihood uh, is very it's interlinked to each other. Then the second part was to look at assessment and implementation of laws and policies that exist in the Indian context. So we have the Biodiversity Act, the Forest Rights Act, the Wildlife Protection Act, and Fisheries Act. These are some of the many acts that exist, and these have not. If you look at the way forests have been diverted, the way mining takes over, the way large scale industrialization is happening, we see a lot of blatant violations of these laws. So, another thing was to look at how these laws have been assessed and implemented on ground. Of course, the role of youth have been, because this is a forum which focuses on youth, it has been repeatedly focused on how youth can have the power to work at grassroots level, and they also are the ones who are questioning the things that are at hand. They are the ones who are asking the important questions that will not just impact the present, but also the future of not just our species, but also our planet in general. Then something which came, which was very important and will keep repeating in various other topics, are the involvement of indigenous and local community, which includes the free informed consent, which is the FPIC, and creating spaces to have their voices to be included in policy making, which is aimed at biodiversity conservation. And if, someone did mention that indigenous communities should be the leaders of conservation and not victims of conservation. And then trying to finally look at the climate crisis from a very holistic point of view, where we see the intersectionality of climate crisis, where this is to mean that we cannot separate ecological crisis from crises of social justice. And only when you see address these together is where we can move together forward in a better way and also achieve what we are trying to achieve. So the first session that we had was on transformative education, which was um, um, addressed by Yuvan, who is an educator. And he mentioned the whole issues that we have with the present education system that exists in India, which is very passive. It kind of creates a same kind of it's a factory system which churns the same kind of skill sets, and it's based on education system based on kind uh, providing for one specific skill set. So it's monoculturing of the mind, and it's very career oriented. It does not. It's very alienating from the real world issues. So what the kind of conversation that emerged and the recommendation that emerged from this session was to have an active citizen science curriculum. And what is citizen science? Which is where young people are proactive participants and the agents of changes in society, where we include their um, participation towards ensuring and understanding about the biodiversity around us, and to also accept the fact that science and knowledge systems are constantly evolving and it's not stable, and therefore these things keep changing. There is a connection and belonging to the local ecology and community, and a better understanding of that. It also asks for a participative eco-literacy, which is a form of a direct ecological democracy, which is where you have people from all walks of life being part of this. And schools does not necessarily have to be something which is restricted to only children. Uh, and it also includes knowledge making through community and public participation, focuses on a strong foundational value. So uh, speaks about whatever is our basic foundation, going back to the roots. All of those are something that this focuses on. It also roots itself on active citizenry, which is on citizenship and citizenship participation, and therefore it requires active participation from all citizens who are going to be part of this, and it can be at various levels, moving from the most smallest local platforms to a global level, and it should connect science to human and ecological values. So these are some of the recommendations that came from the Transformative Education uh, program, the session. The second we had was on rights for nature, which where we touched upon what it means for when we say rights for nature, which is probably looking at a shift from an extractive colonial oriented mindset. It roots itself on indigenous and nature dependent community, and where and Ashish and Nina and all of us have mentioned in the past about how humans are part of rest of nature and not the topmost person itself. And nature is alive and thriving. And these are some of the various things that uh, kind of complements what it means to be rights of nature. And as part of that, some of the recommendations that came from this session was creating awareness campaigns and advocacy around what is rights for nature. In the Indian context, you have the rights for you have the Uttarakhand High Court recognizing rights for the river Ganga. So understanding the complexity of what does it mean when we talk about rights for nature, and creating awareness campaign advocacy around it. At the global level, you look at Ecuador and the constitution having rights for nature. So dialogue, advocacy, campaigning around those is very important. Looking at the potential legal policy strategies that could be pursued in to further these rights. Um, and also look at international laws like CBD, Convention on Migratory Species, Ramsar Convention, uh, uh, which rights of rivers could supersede all national laws in that is in contravention or when where there is doubt. So these various legal strategies, policies, laws, legislations that are put in place, trying to see how those laws can be used uh, to ensure that rights of nature is recognized. Then also trying to understand the relationship of customary and traditional law with any such laws on rights for nature. Um, as we know that there's a lot of knowledge system that already exists with indigenous and local communities. So something like these are very important to understand the relationship of the existing customary and traditional law. And documenting these and creating advocacy around it is also very important. And reimagining the governance system from a point of view of not nation state, but ecoregions or bioregions. So therefore, going a little more on the larger perspective, thinking of in a landscape point of view, and not transcending nation states, it should be ecoregions or bioregions, and supporting local rivers of lake revival and river protection by introducing this concept. These are the recommendations that emerged from rights of rights of nature, and particularly rights of river in the Indian context that was shared in this session. This third session was on women in conservation, and gender and engendering processes have been something that have been taken into account, and there's a lot of conversations even happening at the post 2020 framework discussions, and therefore it was very important to understand what is the role of women in towards biodiversity conservation. As we know that very little of these initiatives or such spaces have been created for women to be able to voice themselves at in various levels. Uh, Even though they are the ones who play a critical role in managing natural resources at various levels. Uh, we need to create spaces where their women-led initiatives towards biodiversity conservation should be recognized in terms of policy and decision-making processes. In many regions, a lot of sorry. In many regions, women are the main contributors in biodiversity conservation, but there's not enough documentation. We don't know how they are contributing. Therefore, we are not aware of their role towards conservation. However, we need to create more spaces for these create the documentation makes it open to being aware of their role towards larger biodiversity conservation, and therefore they their role in participation while framing policies and conservation will be highlighted in these processes. And it's not just environmental instability, but they are the ones who are the most distressed in cases of even disasters. And despite these challenges, we have seen examples of resilience, especially from women, and adaptive strategies, like in the case of COVID, where Ashish had mentioned about certain examples where it's mostly women-led, and how they've managed to stay resilient in these times. And therefore, it was very important to have a very gendered perspective on biodiversity conservation, because they are a very important and very vital source towards biodiversity conservation. Um, and The next session was on youth activism. Um, we had people, four of which three were from India and one from Germany, who had shared their experiences on what they went through when they were uh, arranging a campaign, and what kind of challenges they faced, what were their success stories. So something that they shared was youth are conscious of the campaigns that they do it, and therefore they work as a unit. And you see that happening globally, where young people have taken charge. Young people are the ones asking all the questions from their governments, asking for responsibility, asking for accountability. So we see that they are working as a unit, and therefore that recognition and support of these campaigns are absolutely needed at these times from all of us. Solidarity is needed to be built, and the kind of we need to provide the recognition of the kind of questions that they are asking. And the youth believe that greed is one of the contributors of biodiversity loss, which was also shared during this session. And it's very true because that is also the reason where we have unparalleled deforestation and biodiversity loss and large scale industrialization, which is leading to leading to the crisis that we have at hand today. Another thing that they did was they said was the recommendation was to create spaces and forums for youth to voice their opinions. So you have spaces like Gibbon and the local chapters. You have Fridays for Future. You have their local chapters. You also have local level youth forums. So therefore, it is important that these spaces and these forums are recognized, and they are the ones who are able to reach out and create, as Chantal said, a community of young people and people who can come together because we share the same values and same vision towards conservation. Also, another recommendation that came was enabling diversity, which is also part of the campaign that Gibbon is doing, which is trying to ensure that we do not exclude any people from any walks of life. So, one of the ways we enable biodiversity is through translations of all kinds of written materials, translations of all kinds of audiovisual materials, ensuring anything and policy-wise, law-wise, anything and any material that comes out is translated and uh, is accessed by as many people as it can be. And after that, conversation and constant engagement with people, and having these conversations, having these study circles, having these groups that can create conversations around what is happening, how we can move forward, is something that ensures that we have diversity of opinions, a diversity of the worldviews that we could document and put together in one place. Then it also demands a governance where the concern and questions should reach the concerned responsible authorities, which is something which is very important because a lot of campaigns require that. It's asking for the local legislators and authorities to take note, to act on these immediately, which is a huge task in itself when they're carrying out a campaign. And also, we see a lot of crackdown of these young activists and any young people who are talking about this in a larger forum and voicing their criticism against whatever is happening. And therefore, it is important to protect young people who are asking for accountability and transparency from the state. Because otherwise, no, the youth will, if these crackdowns continue and the state oppression continues, then it's kind of demotivating for a young person to be able to voice out in the right forums. So these were some of the recommendations that came from this session. Um, the pollinator session was very interesting because this was a session which gave the participants a view of how important pollinators are, and it includes more than just honeybees. It includes flies and wasps and other things. So other bees. So it also opened our eyes to the fact that research on this is it anything around it is limited. The use of pesticides and lack of knowledge is leading to the impacting pollinators at a very high level. So we realize that any kind of documentation of uh, changes in pollinators is not possible because no one has documented 20 years in the past, because there's very limited research and documentation around pollinators, and it's only something that's slowly being picked up and being spoken about and given importance. Therefore, the three recommendations that came in this session was education about what are pollinators. It can these education is from the like uh, the lowest most, which is starting in schools to all the way up to masters, and this curriculum should include information about flies, about what the differences, what the various kinds of pollinators are, and trying to then understand the pollinators around their around their surroundings itself, and then create awareness of what these pollinators do, and you have workshops and how you can contribute to ensuring you can conserve pollinators. So you had workshops and seminars that could be organized to understand these. And of course, through these also increase the amount of research and documentation, which, as mentioned, was limited. So this would help, the education awareness program can help get more people interested in this topic, so that we can have more and more people do research and documentation around pollinators. And this youth and young people are the best people to be the ones who can take this up and continue and build a vast database of pollinators. Um, then we had a session on community conservation. And some of the recommendations that they had in this session was to link conservation to the culture, and understand how cultural practices of various communities and is linked directly to biodiversity conservation. Then another thing that was focused on was trying to create diversity within conservation models, where it says that while the protected area model, which is a fortress-based model, is effective in certain areas towards conservation of certain species, but it should not be the only model for biodiversity conservation. And we should also look at spaces for coexistence and look at a more landscape level form of conservation, something that could include and have community-owned, uh, uh, community-based conservation, which is more inclusive and democratic. And to move towards that, it might have things like recognitions of their rights, and rights-based kind of approach towards ensuring communities also have a voice towards uh, decision-making bodies where in various conservation forums. Then accountability, advocacy, and support, which is we found that there was a lack of appropriate recognition, lack of political and legal and economic support to the indigenous communities. And therefore, this should be addressed at various forums and at various levels, including local, national, and global levels. And this would help strengthen communities towards addressing their issues and their uh, move towards conservation. And through that, we also help build capacities of communities who've been engaged in community conservation. So these were some of the recommendations that came from this session. With marine conservation, some of the factors impacting it included high industrial demands, alienation of local communities, no formal recognition of marine ecosystem, and traditional knowledge systems. So now, some of the recommendations that came from this session was, um, again, inclusive conservation, which is to include local communities in key decision-making bodies and wider consultative processes. You also have laws and legislation which needs to look beyond the coastal regulation zone, and have more legislations in place for coastal and marine protection, which includes the Biodiversity Act, the Wildlife Protection Act, which is, and then Fisheries Act, which is state-wise, Shipping Act, which is again state-wise, the Atomic Energy Act, which regulates the mining of sand and along the coast, and the various pollution laws. And uh, including sustainabilities into legislatures and climate change has to be considered, which should go beyond national and state action plans. Uh, Another recommendation that came was we need to have a separate ministry for coastal management, because currently it's split between Ministry of Earth Sciences, Environment and Forest and Climate Change, and Ministry of Agriculture. And then we also have the coastal zone management authorities to move clearances to actual assessment based on vulnerabilities and carrying capacity. And again, we also have yet another capacity building here where the biodiversity management committees need to be empowered and trained. And there's a need to re-establish and empower local institutions. Um, and then we have the DSI, where which uh, we some of the recommendations that came from this session was again free, prior, informed consent of indigenous communities and local communities, as mentioned under Article 6 of the Nagoya Protocol. Then the recognition of more biodiverse heritage sites, as India is among the 12 mega biodiverse countries in the world. Then we also have monitoring at various levels. There should be checkpoints at every district and district magistrates, and district forest chiefs should be made the concerned officers to monitor these checkpoints. Since 2015, India has published 67 of the internationally recognized certificate of compliance to access benefit sharing clearinghouse mechanism. We can also launch a national level clearinghouse mechanism and a state level clearinghouse mechanism. In this way, users such as scientists, industries, and other ministry will be able to understand and comply with the domestic ABS laws and regulations. And as people, biodiversity registers are a dynamic process to collect and disseminate data on biological diversity and help in effective implementation of access benefit sharing. The authorities can include youth in this process of documentation, and they be the ones who can facilitate collection and the actual data collection and with the communities. Then we had two informal sessions on people who are storytellers, who are also filmmakers and artists. And we realized that storytelling is an important medium for biodiversity awareness, biodiversity conservation awareness. And therefore, it is very important that we need to create spaces for artists, filmmakers who are documenting stories around conservation and nature. And we also therefore help create these spaces and publicize about their work in a larger forum through film festivals, biodiversity film festivals. We could have smaller sessions, poetry slam sessions that could help. We could also have painting competitions that could help create some kind of awareness and interest towards biodiversity conservation. And also ensuring while all of this is happening and we create spaces for this, we also protect their rights of free speech and expression. I think with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you all. These are some of the recommendations that have emerged out of the various 11 sessions that we had organized at India level. And as Bharat shared, that we had people from as young as 11-year-old to as we don't know who the oldest person was because it'll be rude to ask what their age was. But I think it was a very interesting session, and we were quite happy with the turnout, the kind of questions that were asked, and some of them were pertinent to the way we look at things, including questions like how do we, 11-year-old asking, how do we measure biodiversity? Things that are something which we all still are discussing at global level. So these are some of the recommendations, and thank you all.